I spend my days as a humble worker at 7-Eleven. More specifically, I was a store manager and franchise owner. I was no software engineer or doctor, and while my family did have their opinions on what I did for a living, my job paid rather well. I was a very different man in my past, but deciding to go the route of franchising a store was a more hands-on career path that mostly kept me in check. It was a low-stress but high-labor job, and that was honestly perfect for me. The job was almost therapeutic to me. It gave me something to take care of, something to look forward to every day. Of course, I couldn't do this alone. Working with me in my daytime shifts were workers Molly and Adam. Molly and Adam were young. They were working there to pay off their college tuition. We all considered ourselves like a family to each other. Molly, Adam, and I grew super close to each other in our time working there. They were like the kids I never had, and this naturally made me a little protective over them. We would always encounter weird or upset customers, and it was usually me who had to stand up for them. I didn't want anything to happen to them. They were so young. Nothing bad had happened to Molly or Adam yet, and I was grateful for that. But one early morning, that changed. It was a Tuesday morning. I want to say the incident occurred around 9 a.m. The sun was out. Things seemed to be going normal. This time of day was always peaceful. There was usually never any problems. Eventually, a blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Inside of the car was a rather average-looking middle-aged man. He stepped out of the car and started filling it with gas. While the pump was going, he then proceeded to the front of the store. As per their training, Molly and Adam greeted him. The man just nodded and started walking around the aisles. He then looped back around the store, approached Molly, and started flirting with her. Molly was visibly uncomfortable, and while I wanted to go to the back of the store and do my inventory logging, I couldn't do this, not with a man hitting on Molly like that. Adam, however, told me that he could handle the man if he started acting any weirder, and naturally, trusted him. I reluctantly stepped in the back room and started counting down and logging all the items that were there. While I was doing this, however, I kept looking back towards the man to see what he was doing. It seemed like the man was looking back at me as well. This was odd for a number of reasons. Customers aren't supposed to be this close to the back of the store, and he kept awkwardly peering in through the utility room. To make things worse, every time I looked back, the man started to try and act busy. It was like he was trying to pass time or look natural for some reason. I stepped out of the room and asked the man if I could help him. He seemed to awkwardly and rudely shun me off and keep pacing around the store pretending like he was looking for something. For some reason, I decided to ignore all these red flags and continue my work in the back. Eventually, while Molly was passing by the back room, she whispered to me that the man was making her very uncomfortable. I told her that once I finished with the shelf I was working on, I would quickly go outside and help her. Essentially told her to hang in there and wait behind Adam. It was super confusing what the man even wanted. He seemed to have stopped flirting with Molly completely and was instead focused on trying to peer through the back door for some reason. As annoying as this was, I just wanted to get through my work. I had one last crate of granola bars to lock down, and I didn't want this weird man to stop that. But that's when I heard a commotion coming from the main room. "Excuse me, sir. You're not allowed to be back there. What are you trying to pull off? Call the police, Adam," I heard Molly exclaim right after that. I quickly ran out of the storage room to see what was happening and saw the commotion. The man in the blue car was trying to pull something off. I saw Molly in shock and fear in the corner, and Adam with his fists up standing right in front of her. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I asked the man. Whoa. What kind of place is this? What's even back there? What are you guys hiding? Get out of here." The sign clearly says employees only. You expect me to just sit here and let you get away with this? No way in hell. We were all in complete shock. Adam tried to calm the man down, however. Sir, we don't need to get violent, okay? You can just calm down and we don't have to. I don't want to hear another word from you psychos. The man snapped back at Adam. Molly started to cry. She was ready to dart out the store. The man then started reaching for his pocket. We had no idea what he was going to pull out. Tackled the man in the back of the shop and screamed at Adam and Molly to just head away and call the police. Few more minutes of us wrestling in the utility room occurred. I managed to headlock the man, but he just kept hitting me off. After a few more minutes of us wrestling and fighting in the back, the cops eventually got there, but sadly, they couldn't find him on the scene. We got the man's face on security camera, and his car was still at the pumps. We had both his face and his license plate on camera. Despite all this, the police just left. They couldn't find any sign of him and they assumed that he just ran out through one of the other back doors. As the cops left, I made sure to dump the man's body right next to the first. As I mentioned before, I was a different man in my past. This job really changed me. It seemed like the man in the blue car clearly noticed the other body I had. Normally, it's pretty well hidden. Not even Molly or Adam could find it. But I guess one of the legs must have been sticking out or something like that while I was moving stuff around. I re-looked at the security footage to make sure there was no evidence left behind. It seemed like the man wasn't reaching for a gun or a knife. He was reaching for his phone to call the police. Really didn't want it to be this way, but he knew my secret. The man was now part of my collection. Molly and Adam still have no idea what happened, and you bet I'm planning to keep it that way. They can't find out anything about my past. If they did, they'd be shattered. For now, my secret remains safe from the public eye, and I will ensure no one remembers that day. It was a somewhat nippy autumn night, and I was about halfway into my shift. I was a young man and I took up any job I really could at the time. In this case, it was a late shift at 7-Eleven. In the United States, 7-Elevens are open 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. This meant that someone had to take up that horrid night shift, and that person was me. As much as the job messed up my sleep schedule, it did help me do my coursework during the day, and it did pay a bit better than normal shifts. I've been told that working in a convenience store is among the most dangerous jobs in the States, and this claim was honestly understandable. Although my city is decently safe, the people who go to 7-Elevens late at night are a lot different than your normal shopper. From what I saw, it was either crazy crackheads higher than a kite or a bunch of drunken teenagers falling all over the place trying to make another booze run. This was extremely annoying. My coworker Colin and I were largely responsible for kicking these people out, and while it was an inconvenience, it never got truly out of hand or unsafe. This all changed one Thursday night, however. My coworker Colin had some sort of family emergency to take care of, and this resulted in him having to skip a few shifts. This meant that I was in charge of handling the dreaded 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift completely alone. This truly annoyed me. Colin was a really chill guy. His conversations made the hours go by much faster, and without him, I'd just be alone in some dirty store in the middle of the night. Regardless, I received my manager's orders and I had to do what I had to do. I arrived at my shift around 5 minutes late as usual, and things were initially going by completely normal. The people that walked in consisted of the usual late-night shoppers and people in their pajamas stopping for gas last minute. It seemed like a completely normal weekday night at first. But then, a little past the midnight hour, things got really strange. It was 12:15 at night, and I was sitting on my small chair next to the counter. I had just plugged in my phone into a charger as it was running low on battery from using it all night, And that's when I noticed a car pull up to one of the pumps. It was a large black SUV. The windows in the back were either completely shattered or lazily replaced with cardboard and duct tape. A tall and rather large-built man stepped out in a trench coat and boots. He turned over to the front door of the store and started to calmly approach it. I just kept glancing at my phone, however. Most people walk in, quickly get something, and leave. There was no need for formalities at this hour. You call this customer service, the man said in a low, husky voice. It took me a second or two to process that. The people who come in here, especially at this time, aren't exactly expecting award-winning service. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Is there anything I can get for you?" The man just laughed. "Oh, kid, there's nothing you can get for me, but there is something you can do." At first, I thought the man was going to ask for some weird sexual favor. Funnily enough, I'd been asked this before while I was on the job. You see, I'm not a young man like you. My joints, they don't function like they used to, and you see my car over there. Well, I could use a wash and fill. The man's attitude and overall demeanor were really weird. The way the guy was talking was unsettling as it is. I mean, if the guy could walk all the way over here just fine, why couldn't he fill his own gas or wash his own windshield? However, state law says I have to assist any handicapped or impaired customers if they request it. There was no handicapped sticker on the man's car or any sign that he was disabled in any way. But hey, if they request it, I have to help them. "All right, sir, give me a moment," I replied as I placed my phone to the side. I then turned on the pump for my control panel and started heading towards the car. Ha! Look at those youthful muscles work. I love to see it. For whatever reason, I ignored the man's creepiness and continued heading towards the car. The sooner I cleaned his windshield and filled his tank, the sooner he'd be out of there. At least that's what I hoped. As I stepped out of the building, the man seemed to remain in the store. He seemed to be browsing up and down the shelves or something. Whatever. I got to the vehicle and sure enough, the gas cap was wide open and ready for me. As I was filling the van with gas, I couldn't help but think about what the man said. He seemed honestly fine and was totally capable of putting a nozzle in the gas tank. It made me wonder why I was even out there in the first place. But hell, if I could just get this weirdo out of there, I could get back inside to just messing around with my phone. After about a minute or two, the tank was full, and it was time for me to wash the man's windshield. As I stepped around towards the back of the van, however, I heard the back door shut. As weird as this was, keep in mind the car was really beaten down and old. It's kind of expected for a car like that to make weird noises, especially on a windy night like this one. I quickly pulled out the sponge and squeegee and started to get to work. But as I was cleaning the glass, that's when I felt it. The discomfort, the odd sensation of being watched or stalked. As I turned around, I felt a hand go over my eyes and soon my mouth. Barely had any time to comprehend what was even happening. 1 second, I was cleaning glass, and the next I was being headlocked. I then heard the familiar sound of the front door to the store opening and heavy footsteps coming my way. Too many thoughts were racing through my head at this moment, but somehow, somewhere, I mustered everything I had and flung myself as back hard as I could. The person holding me down crashed into the gas pump and shrieked in pain. "Damn it, Carl," the tall man said. I rolled back onto my feet and sprinted as hard as I could, my breath getting heavier and heavier every large stride I made. I managed to run across into a neighborhood and dive into the bushes, slowly peeping my head out to see if they were still following me in the van. After the longest 10 or so minutes of my life, my adrenaline died down, and I finally got the courage to step out of the bush. Just as I was about to call my manager and then the cops, it hit me. My phone was still in the store charging. Thankfully, however, A close friend of mine lived in the neighborhood I ran away towards. I knocked on his door and told him everything. Naturally, we called the police. When we went back to the station after the police told us they'd arrived, my manager was already there. Somehow, my manager and the police were as or more surprised than I was. Things like this rarely happen in my city. We always considered it a safe place. The police immediately looked through the CCTV footage as my manager suggested, and what we saw shocked us even more. When I had stepped out to wash and fill the van, the man jumped over the counter and tried to find and disable the security cameras in their footage. He couldn't manage to do this, so we just stepped outside and decided that deleting the footage wasn't worth all the time. We managed to capture the men's faces on video right after I made my escape. We then submitted the footage to the higher-level police to see what was happening. It turns out the men were known human traffickers and were on the run from previous kidnappings. The license plate on the van seemed to be fraudulent or stolen, as the numbers only matched a completely different vehicle on the other side of the state. The investigators believed that the men stopped by my city on the way to somewhere else, as they figured it was a safer area and people wouldn't expect them to be there. I quit my job at 7-Eleven immediately after that. The event scared me. Every time I stepped into another gas station, I would always get reminded of how I almost got kidnapped. Needless to say, I would never pick up a job like that again. It was a normal Saturday like any other. While most people were having fun or enjoying their weekend, I was cooped up behind a register. I worked at 7-Eleven, and let's just say when you're in my financial situation, you don't really get a huge choice of what you can do over weekends. And while I could make a whole video on how much I hated mopping floors while my richer friends were out having fun, I wanted to get something off my chest. Something more serious, more sinister. I was working the primetime shift between 12 and 8 during this time of year. This is usually when the crowds of people get the largest. The area I live in is quite affluent. I mentioned this before, but my neighbors and my friends are quite rich. This led to a more interesting demographic with my customers. Wealthier people don't tend to shop at gas station convenience stores unless they have to. Most of them end up buying from premium grocery stores down the road. Unless it was some sort of necessity or emergency, no one really went inside, and even if they did, it was always something along the lines of a water bottle or some food or a snack for the road. The result of this was people mostly just serving themselves at the pump and me just sitting and doing nothing. As boring as this was, I honestly enjoyed just sitting and chilling out while people served themselves. This gave me the opportunity to do some schoolwork or listen to music. On weekends during this time of year, however, this dynamic changed. On weekends, there were junior soccer tournaments in local regions. These kids' league soccer competitions meant that travelers would either go into or through our town. This also meant that I had to work a little harder. People were getting more than just water. It would always be something like towels or hand sanitizers or the occasional coffee for the tired chaperone. Being fully aware it was soccer season, I really wasn't surprised at all that there were various large SUVs or minivans constantly pulling into the station. After all, youth soccer is very, very popular in the United States. But bear in mind, this was only during the rush hours. The flurry of cars would only come in right before the game started or right after they ended. Nothing really in between. So when a minivan with a Caparone sticker on the side pulled in at around 3 p.m., I was obviously confused. These games usually end at around 5 p.m. That means the rush hour starts at around 5:30 when everyone's leaving. But I said hell with it. Minivans are among the most popular vehicles in the U.S. Would it really be that uncommon for someone to just own one? And besides, a lot of things could have happened. Maybe a kid got injured and they had to leave early. Maybe they were getting gas now to avoid the rush hour later. Again, a smart choice. So I just resumed scrolling on my phone. But after several minutes, the van was still there. This is obviously not a normal amount of time for a vehicle to stop. But after the few long, awkward minutes went by, the driver stepped out. The driver was a scruffy, middle-aged man. He had a somewhat long beard but seemed overall unkempt. He then tried to fill the car with gas. He seemed to struggle for a few minutes trying to get the pump to work. The pump seemed to be having problems with his credit card reader. This wasn't all too uncommon. Our transaction processing system likes to reject cards it thinks are fraudulent. But off late, it's been acting up and rejecting normal cards. The man walked into the store, and I greeted him like I usually do. "Welcome in, sir," I told the man. The man sort of angrily ignored what I said and walked up to the counter. As intimidating as this was, I've had my fair share of angry customers. It's something I'd been through. The damn pump, it ain't taking my card. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Our systems are kind of weird. Would you like to pay with cash instead?" "Fine, just take this. I need to go use the bathroom." The man left me with a wad of $10 bills and then went to use the bathroom. Clearly, the guy was having a bad day. I better get that pump rolling quick. So I opened up the terminal and tried to get things running. However, this wasn't working either. Normally, customers can walk in and prepay a certain amount of cash at a certain pump, but it looked like the terminal wasn't responding itself. Something was genuinely wrong with this pump. The man was still in the bathroom, and I really wasn't in the mood to go and tell him that he had to move his vehicle. He was already cranky that his card got rejected. I didn't want to start another conflict with him. My next most logical option was to go to the pump itself and try and manually override it. And that's exactly what I did. My manager had taught me a few months ago how to put the pumps in admin mode. This would allow us to see if there was something physically wrong with the pump, or it was just deciding not to work. But unfortunately, there was something seriously wrong with this pump. Something which I wouldn't be able to fix. This wasn't news I was excited to tell the man, but I knew I had to close this pump, and eventually let him know that he'd have to move his car. But as I turned around to go inside, I heard a loud thud. I turned around and saw nothing. At first, I thought it was something from my music. Keep in mind, I have one AirPod in this whole time. But that's when I heard another knock from the van. This couldn't be my music. The knocks were random, they had no beat or rhythm, and they clearly weren't any instrument I'd heard of. Tried to peep in the back windows to see what was happening in there. But the back windows were tinted very, very dark. I really couldn't see in there. I then took my AirPod out to get a better understanding of what was even happening, and heard another thud. This was getting weird. I had to understand what was going on in that damn van. I took out my phone and turned on my flashlight, and I tried to use the flashlight to see better in through the tinted windows. Let's just say it worked. And what I saw horrified me. In the back of the car was a group of children. All of them were tied down with their mouths taped closed. All of them looked terrified. The knocking sound was coming from one of the kids kicking the car door as a sign for help. My heart sank. Didn't even know what to do for that second. Just stood there, frozen in fear and shock. In that paralyzed moment of fear, that's when it all started to hit me. The man's anger and impatience. His fraudulent card not going through, the way he looked at me in the car as he was going to the bathroom. I knew exactly what was happening at this moment. After my brain cleared up, realized I had to stop standing there and quickly go and do something. As I turned around quickly to try and run for help, I bumped right into someone. It was the man. "You know it's not polite to snoop around people's stuff, kid," the man told me, rage and anger under his breath. At this point, both of us knew exactly what was happening. For some reason, I thought I could talk my way out of this. You see, But as I was trying to make up some sort of excuse, the man lunged at me. With all of the luck in the world, I managed to dodge him. Keep in mind that I'm a rather skinny young man. Thankfully, I had the agility advantage on my side, and I could somehow outmaneuver him. As the man was getting back on his feet, I managed to grab one of the windshield cleaning wands from the bucket nearby. Without even thinking, I managed to smack him across the face with it as hard as I could. This seemed to knock him out cold. I then quickly smashed open the car windows using the same rod and let the kids out. All of the kids and I ran inside the store. We locked the doors and called the cops. The man was gaining consciousness by the time the cops came, but was handcuffed soon after. I told the police everything, and they instantly had a case. The man was part of a larger kidnapping ring in my state. Off late, their newest strategy was to pretend to be chaperones and kidnap kids from sports games. A lot of these sports teams have transportation services which help bring the kids in and out, and these people managed to find a way of pretending to be them. The kids were all thankfully okay, and they were instantly reunited with their parents. But obviously, this left a bad stain on our community. A lot of parents stopped using carpools or paid transportation to bring their kids in and out of the games. Some even de-enrolled their children permanently. I couldn't help but imagine what could have happened to those kids if that pump didn't fail. If the terminal just accepted his money and he could drive off. Needless to say, I quit 7-Eleven right after that. I was being paid to use a cash register, not deal with kidnappers. It was a cool spring evening, and I was a little more than halfway through a road trip. For a bit of context, I'm a 23-year-old man. I was starting my career as an aspiring actor and model at the time, and things were starting to pick up with my job. I was contacted by a well-known agency in Los Angeles, California, and they said they were willing to do a long-term contract with me and essentially were ready to start work. Obviously, I was thrilled. And while this was a dream come true, there was one issue. I lived in New York, and being a 23-year-old working an almost minimum wage job, I really couldn't afford to just hop on a flight and go over to LA. So when I got the news, I did the math, and I realized that it would actually be a lot cheaper to just drive from New York to California. Now, obviously, if I had the money, I would obviously choose flying 6 hours over driving 40 in my dad's old Ford. But hey, money doesn't grow on trees, and I wasn't going to reject this opportunity. So there I was, about 24 hours into the trip. I had taken a rest somewhere in Kentucky, but was still quite tired. Sleeping in your car is never fun, especially after hours and hours of driving in it. A couple more hours went by, and I caught myself in a rural part of West Texas. At this point, I noticed that my car was running a bit low on gas, and most importantly, the low air pressure light was on. My parents have had this car since I was a kid, so obviously I wasn't going to take the risk of just driving with the light on. After all, I wouldn't want to get stuck somewhere on the rural highway. According to the Maps app on my phone, the nearest gas station with an air pump was a local 7-Eleven, about 10 minutes off of my trip's path. It was late at night, 1 a.m. to be specific, but thankfully 7-Elevens are open 24/7. As much as the ditter annoyed me, I really didn't have much of a choice. Was honestly lucky that there wasn't even anything open and nearby. Drove up to the 7-Eleven and pulled my car into the nearest pump. I popped open my gas cap and started filling my car, and after a few minutes, surely enough, it was full. But then came the next and arguably most important step, fixing that tire pressure light. While I was out of my car, I tried to look around and look at which tire was tripping off the sensor. But as I was looking around, I noticed a shadow from inside the store. It moved somewhat awkwardly. It seemed like one of the store workers was peering out the window, and they backed away instantly when they saw me look over. Well, that's weird, I thought. Despite the clerk's social anxiety, I needed to get to my destination, and I didn't want to spend any more time here than I had to. So I went up to the air pump, and sadly enough, the air pump wasn't self-serve. This meant I had to go inside and talk to that nervous employee for help. Damn it. I walked in the door and looked around, but I didn't see any employees whatsoever. The store was barren, almost like it was up and running and suddenly abandoned. All of the lights were on, and the equipment was functioning. The hum of the refrigerators and AC ironically made the silence even creepier. I figured that employee from before was somewhere in the back on his break, so I tried to get his attention. Hello. Excuse me. There was a long and awkward pause, followed by a set of steps coming in from the back. Hello. Is anyone there? Asked once again. Another long and awkward pause followed, and then eerie sounds of manic laughter. Excuse me. Is this some kind of joke? Asked, irritated from the antics. What was going on? Why was this employee acting like a kid? Come on over. Don't be shy, the man said, trying to lure me over to the back. Don't get me wrong, I was beyond creeped out and confused at this point, but I just wanted him to hit the damn power switch to the pump. I reluctantly walked over to the back to check what was happening. I figured if I just played into this guy's weird game, he'd just listen to me or leave me alone. So naturally, I reluctantly walked over to the back. There was nothing behind the counter, but there seemed to be a constant giggling from a door that said employees only. My back was tense, and pretty much every urge in my body told me not to open the door, but mistakenly, I did. When I opened that door, I saw something I'd never forget for the rest of my life. In the room there was a 7-Eleven employee, still in his vest and uniform, mutilated on the ground. Behind the employee was the man giggling from before, still chuckling. He was barefoot, sickly looking, and had tattered, bloody clothing. He then looked at me with manic eyes and started laughing even harder. My feet were frozen, almost like they were cemented into the ground. But then, the man's laughter turned into full-on screaming, and he started crawling towards me. I quickly slammed the door and darted towards my car, but as I was running, I felt something tug my ankle and trip me from behind. "Now don't leave so early," the man said, trying to drag me back. I kicked the man in the face as hard as I could and ran out. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As soon as I pulled out of the spot, the crazy man jumped on my hood and started screaming at me to stop the car. I didn't know what else to do, so I just floored it, and that seemed to throw the man off. I kept driving and never looked back, sweating and panting the whole time. Eventually, the tire that was low on air got me, and I had to pull over into another town. I immediately called the local law enforcement and told them everything that happened. When they showed up to the scene, they did not find a single thing. Aside from the dead 7-Eleven worker and raided store with broken glass and flipped over shelves, the police couldn't find anything that could lead them to the man. The police could obviously identify the dead employee, but had no idea who the laughing man was or where he could be. The man was a ghost. I've never told anyone this story, at least not until now, and that's probably for good reasons. I currently live in LA, and while I am still pursuing my career in entertainment, I still sometimes think about where that man could be.